Welcome back to the final part with Barry Beck here. Brought to you by Don Cherry Sports Grill, the Johnny Mac Show. We've been talking about, hockey and more hockey all the way from Vancouver, BC to the Big Apple and finally in LA. So you retire in LA, 1990, is that right? Or 89? What year?
Yeah, 1990.
1990, you hang them up, and then what do you immediately do post career, Barry?
Well, at that time, it was a big adjustment. I mean, if you're not involved with hockey and get directly into hockey, then you're looking for your own path of whatever interest you may have. For me, it was just a big adjustment period because everything was hockey my whole life. So now I had to get out into the professional world, and I got involved working with kids. I really wanted to be away from the game because, I had a bitter taste in my mouth when I retired. It certainly wasn't under my own terms when you're hurt, but I did come back, and I thought that I needed to try to do that. But yeah, it was a big adjustment for me. And I think it is for a lot of players that were my age at that time, because hockey is what they knew. They weren't really experts in post-career as far as occupations go, for something to fall back on. So me, it took some time before I decided to get back into hockey and working with kids. That was really the part of the game that I remembered the most and having the most fun. And I thought I could become a coach, and I didn't have aspirations to coach at the NHL level. I just wanted to work with kids and trying to make a difference in their lives and be a positive role model. And that's what I started doing back in Soyuz in British Columbia, about 4 hours outside of Vancouver. And I enjoyed that. I ended up coaching the junior B team there, but I got to admit and be honest, I wasn't a very good coach. I I took a lot of things for granted, that players knew that they weren't supposed to give the puck to the other team. so those little things, you can look at some players, and just because they know the game doesn't make them a good coach.
Right.
You've got to understand players and how to be a good teacher. And so that's what I learned as I continued to work with young players. And then I got the opportunity to come to Asia. And yeah, that was a big opportunity. I had a son already. My son was born in 1999 in Brantford, Ontario. So I was a father. I often say that was my biggest achievement. And I think most fathers will tell you the same thing, that they don't worry, especially players who've gone on to become athletes, that wasn't as important to them to be a good father. So I had the opportunity to come to Hong Kong, and I didn't even know where Hong Kong was. I had some friends that came over and played in a hockey tournament, the Vancouver police team. Actually, it was the Delta police team. Delta is just outside of Vancouver.
Yeah.
And one of them had got in touch with me and said they were looking for somebody to come to Hong Kong to start an academy. And if I was interested, and I really wasn't interested at that point, I thought I would look for somebody for them. And through my corresponding with Hong Kong, and I grew up with a lot of Asian kids in Vancouver.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, and I'd never been to Asia. And I started to learn a lot about Hong Kong, learned what a tropical climate it is in, because it's quite far south in China.
Mm-hmm.
And I had that opportunity and decided to come to China. There were no other former NHL players that were in China at the time. And China was such a big market with 1.4 billion people that I thought it was a great opportunity for me to go overseas and try to expand the game into a market where there was so much possibilities. And so that's where I've been the last 16 years.
Yeah, so and interesting, I believe just based on the Chinese government's history, with athletics and sports, right, and the way that they develop. If you look what they did at the Beijing Olympics that year, with in some sports that you would never associate with the Chinese, and all of a sudden they're winning gold medals. I believe there's going to be a day where it's going to be prominent over there, and they're going to compete at the world stage. I don't know if we'll see it, but it's a pretty cool thought to see that, and you'll be a pioneer, right? You grew the game in a place that hadn't been grown yet. Outstanding. And just to give our viewers and listeners a little bit of a backstory. So I kind of, we became Facebook friends, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, and we would communicate a little bit back and forth here and there, but I always would enjoy your posts and talking about some of your stories. I would laugh out loud some of the stories that you would tell about some of the antics when you were playing in the NHL. And then we got I want to talk about a man, and I know he was a dear friend of yours, a U.S. Olympian, Mark Pavelich. So this is kind of when we started I started to follow your story on social media. You were at that point, you and Gene Pavelich. Mark was incarcerated in Minnesota, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but he was having a real tough time with some mental health issues, and you and his sister Jean were really trying to help him and bring awareness maybe to the National Hockey League Players Association, the league itself, the Rangers alumni, things like that. So kind of walk me through your friendship with Mark. Obviously you met with the Rangers after the 80 Olympics. He joined the Rangers in 81 or 82, in around there. And tell me about your friendship and how that started, and kind of lead up to what happened here in Minnesota.
Yeah, well, you had mentioned that we were teammates for the Rangers in the early 80s, and I had saw Mark play at the 80 Olympics. Of course, it was in Lake Placid. So being a member of the Rangers, we followed them very closely, and he was really, I thought, the catalyst for that team. And he assisted on Mikey Ruzione's winning goal against the Russians. And when he came to the Rangers, Herb Brooks was already there. And yeah, he was just such a creative player. And yeah, we became good friends. He was a tough guy to get to know. He was very quiet. And he really loved, he didn't love the limelight. He just loved playing hockey. He grew up on the ponds in Minnesota, and that's what he knew. He went to the University of Minnesota Duluth, where he became a star. He was a star player growing up, and then played on that Olympic hockey team. Fast forwarding it, and I had scrolling down one day on my Facebook feed, and I saw a story about Mark being arrested in Minnesota, where he was being arrested for assault and had some gun charges against him. And I think I saw him about 7 years prior to that at a Ranger function. But maybe 4 months prior to reading that he'd been arrested, I had a dream about him. And we were riding horses at this ranch and waiting for our teammates, and we were racing. And anyways, I had never had a dream about Mark for a long time. I mean, ever.
Yeah.
So when I saw that he was arrested, I immediately tried to reach out to a family member to see how I could help. And so I ended up getting a hold of his sister, Jean. Jean and I became great friends, and we still are. And yeah, it was when Mark was incarcerated. After he was put in the county jail, he was moved to a psychiatric facility where he spent over a year. And there I started calling him every other day. And yeah, he was a fragile individual. I think he was sick. We think it was CTE, which, when I started to put a group together, I had a lot of players that were interested in helping Mark. And a lot of those players worked for NHL teams. But when the topic of CTE came up, they said they couldn't be involved anymore.
Yep.
So that was disappointing because of the lawsuit that went through. The NHL teams didn't want to hear about CTE anymore. The bottom line is money. I mean, that's the bottom line to everything. And so there were two players that really were instrumental in helping myself and Gene put together the ranch group, when that was Clint Malarchuk and Tom Gorence. Tom was an American player, played for the Flyers. They grew up in Minnesota, Newmark. And Clint, of course, is an advocate for mental health. I know he played for Buffalo and he played for the Nordiques, because I remember scoring a goal out of breakaway. Probably one of the only breakaways I had in my career. And we managed to put a great team together. And we wanted to start a facility, and Mark did too, where we could help former players that were having trouble, mental health problems, and they could get the help that they needed, because the Alumni Association just didn't have the resources to do that, to be able to help former players, especially players that are my age, that are encountering problems, and they needed a place to go where they could be nurtured. And we're talking about tough guys, that they don't want to admit, men don't want to admit that they have mental problems. It's a sign of weakness, and it's really a sign of strength.
Absolutely.
So we had gotten Mark into a pretty good place. Clint Malarchuk did a lot of work in helping Mark get out of the psychiatric facility into a place called the Eagles Healing Nest in Sauk Center, Minnesota, run by Melanie Butler. And that caters to veterans, mostly with PTSD. And so we have, struck up a correspondence with her. And, it's pretty hard for me to be involved being in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
I try to be, but really there's been such a great team put together, that they've done great work. And there was just the opening ceremony, the ribbon cutting this past weekend.
Yeah.
And I think they'll look forward to the first patient in maybe 3 weeks from today's time. So I know we want to add, Clint Malarchuk does a lot of work with equine therapy with veterans.
Yeah.
So we look for animal therapy. And Mark is from Minnesota, so it made sense to start the ranch in Minnesota. And it's called the Ranch Teammates for Life. And that's the slogan that we came up to. And like I said, we put together a great team that really cares a lot about people. And so it's been great to be involved with such a team that works so hard.
Oh, absolutely. And I've watched it since its infancy, and the work that's been put in, and in Mark's honor, and by all of you is tremendous. We were talking off the air about the auction that just kind of went through, and so I mean, there the jerseys signed by all the Boston Bruins, and all the different pieces of memorabilia, and not just hockey related either. There was a lot of a fishing trip in Minnesota, and things like that. Tremendous initiative. Very, very well thought out, and let's face it, it's needed, right? There's a lot of guys that leave this sport and in not in a good place. And you said it earlier in one of the other segments that you had to make your money, right? Your shelf life isn't that long in the National Hockey League. What's the average career? 4 years, right? If you play more than 4 years, you had a big career. So you got to make the money, and a lot of the guys don't realize that, and blow through everything that they have, and you're dealing with, you know, a plethora of issues with, you know, whether it's substance abuse or alcoholism or depression or whatever it is, and then you come out and I've talked to, you know, several guys that have come out of the league and just have been absolutely lost. What do I do? Right? I'm used to being coddled. I'm used to, you know, having here's your schedule, right? You got to be on a plane, right? You know, you got to be at the airport now, and we got to be on the bus here, and we play, and then all of a sudden it's like, what do I do? So no, kudos to you all. I'd love to, you know, do a show, you know, with Gene and maybe Clinton yourself down the road and talk about, you know, how it's going once it's going, and really, you know, bring some awareness. But yeah, it's, you know, the ranch teammates for life.org. Just a tremendous initiative. And I know, you know, it's tough for you to, you know, talk about Mark, and I'm going to get into an even tougher subject right now, because while you were dealing with kind of, you know, helping Mark and setting up this ranch, go back to July 2020, and your life changed forever, right? Tell me, you know, walk me through that, and you know, as a dad, I can't imagine, you know, it's something that, you know, you don't wish on your worst enemy. But how did you find out? And you know, just to put it out there, Barry's only son, who we mentioned earlier in the broadcast, Brock, was murdered in Hamilton, Ontario, in July of 2020, and I remember just a collective, you know, gut drop across, you know, your network for sure, and I'm sure the whole world. So, you know, I appreciate you going there and talking about that.
Yeah, thanks, John. You know, it's not hard for me to talk about Mark, and it's not hard for me to talk about my son. I mean, I loved my son. I was, like I said, I was a father. I talked about it earlier. And yeah, when my brother called me, and well, July 26th is coming around here pretty quickly, and that's the anniversary of my son's murder. And yeah, it was devastating for our families, of course. And it always will be. So your life has changed forever. And it's, where do you go from there? What do you try to do? So I think a lot of people who have lost children try to keep their memory alive, and will try to build foundations for them, or something where they can try and help other people, especially parents that go through such a loss. In my case, it was a murder. A lot of other parents, it could be a sickness or an accident, but it's still the loss of a child. I don't consider mine to be any more extravagant than anyone others, because it is such a deep personal loss that you really can't comprehend it until you go through it yourself. So, and I understand that people don't know, but you can only imagine what you go through after that. You have to try and build your life again, and it's a deep hole to get out of, and you just seem like you're forever trying to climb that mountain. But that's okay. I have a lot of beautiful memories of my son. And yeah, there's a lot of things I think about. You know, for me, it was all about my emotions.
Mhm.
It was about guilt that I felt of coming to China and being away from my son. You know, I would see my son maybe 1 month of the year. We would spend Christmas together. Usually he would come here. We'd go to Thailand, which he loved. We have a lot of great memories of that. And then I would see him in the summer, where we would get together with my mom and my family out in British Columbia. So we didn't see each other a lot, but we had a great relationship. And yeah, when I found out that he was murdered, this was at the height of COVID.
Yeah.
So when I went back to Toronto, and then of course into the town of Binbrook, which is about 20 minutes from Hamilton, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was in quarantine for 2 weeks, so I couldn't attend the funeral or the viewing. So I had to try and find out things for myself. So after that 2 week period was up, I went and knocked on a lot of doors in Binbrook and really tried to find out as much as I could. And it wasn't until I left Binbrook and came back to Hong Kong that the 4 young men were arrested and charged with murder in my son's case, which all stemmed from a road rage incident where him and a friend were followed back to a house party. And as soon as they got out of their car, they were attacked by 4 men that followed them in another car, pulled in behind them so they couldn't move. And then the attack ensued where my son was stabbed to death. And yeah, the 4 men that were arrested, I got to be honest. And I mean, I wanted to kill them all. And that's sort of what I went through. And I still do. I mean, there's times I know people will comment and say, some people will say you have to forgive, and that's something pretty tough to forgive. Yeah. When your son's life is taken in such a senseless, violent act, you want revenge. And that's what I wanted for a long time. The young man who stabbed my son got 3.5 years in prison, and I didn't think that was justice at all. No. But there was a lack of evidence. So we had to accept the plea bargain. I mean, we didn't have to, but if we didn't, then we ran the risk of going to trial and not getting anybody. Yeah. Because I would listen to the bail hearings of the other 3 and just wasn't going anywhere. The court was a liberal court in Southern Ontario. And yeah, that was just so tough to sit through and listen to all that. I mean, this is the pain that the families go through. That when you lose a child, that, just nothing that can compensate for that.
No, and I've wrote to you over the years here, some of the posts and if you weren't a hockey player, I think you should have been a writer. You're very elegant and how you can put things, pen to paper, inspiring, right? Brutally honest. I can remember a particular post, and I think you said you hadn't slept in a week, and you just poured out your heart to people that and then people that you don't know, and I remember thinking, oh my goodness, like here's this, here's the like I said earlier, the big, prototypical NHL defenseman, big, tough, mean, and he's pouring his heart out here, and he's speaking with raw emotion, and it was just Barry, it was so inspiring to see you show vulnerability, and I think a lot of us that would have read that, it's helped me as a person. It's helped me understand that, hey, you know what, say how you feel and get it out there. And I'm sure, if I asked you, speaking about it helps. Just to talk about transparency, when we were messaging the other day when we were setting up the show, I didn't know what you wanted to talk about, and I certainly would be respectful for anything. And your answer, I quote, was, any topic is fine. And I think the message that, I'd like to get out from these very difficult discussions is that, like you said, it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to show vulnerability. But how did you get to, from July 2020, 3 years now, how has your journey got you to the place that you're in now? And is it a good place? Or are you still, struggling with this? How talk about
that. There are days when I do struggle. And I think there are days when everybody struggles. So I'm no different than anyone else. I think everyone's path is different. Everyone's journey is different. And I think everybody is respectful of each other and what we have to try and do to survive. For me, I went through a very bad addiction to sleeping pills. And so I went through rehab September of last year. And, yeah, I don't take sleeping pills anymore. And that was tough because, as you mentioned, when my son was killed, I mean, I just couldn't sleep.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, I was just constantly thinking about those that were involved. It took 4 months for the four young men to be arrested.
Hmm.
And I had come back to Hong Kong by that point, and it was easy for me to get sleeping pills in Hong Kong. I
Sure.
don't need a prescription. I can just go to the pharmacy and I can pick up as many as I want. And so my addiction just grew. The more I used, the more that I needed. And then it got to a point where I just needed them to function. I
Hmm.
mean, I wasn't even sleeping. But I knew that I was an addict because of the withdrawals that I went through. They were so painful. Yeah, that was a tough part. So in September, when I went back to New York to speak to the New York alumni on the ranch and Mark Pavlich about how the progression of it, I ran out of sleeping pills while I was there, and I started to go through withdrawals. When I was at the golf tournament, and I ran into Glenn Sather, and after I ran into Glenn Sather and had a brief conversation with him, I ran into a doctor who just happened to be Glenn Sather's doctor, who was at the golf tournament, who I asked to try and get a prescription from for more pills
Hmm.
while I was there. Then I told him how many pills that I was using, and he said, "You should be dead. Nobody uses that amount of pills within a 24-hour period." I think it was around 70 pills I was using within a 24-hour period. That's 10 milligrams a pill. That's 700 milligrams.
Yeah.
I mean, it destroys your nervous system. So those are the side effects and the complications that I have now of my severe neuropathy. Is I have a lot of nervous system problems. That's a
Hmm.
lot of body. That's a lot of body pain. It's tough for my legs. My feet aren't right. You know, it's like I'm wearing ski boots,
Hmm.
and I can't bend my ankles properly. So, I mean, I don't dwell on it too much. I try not to, but when you mentioned about the struggles, I mean, it's struggles for me just to put my clothes on in the morning. So, and I'm one who is used to being working out my whole life. So that's very challenging. That's the biggest challenge for me right now is my health.
Yeah.
Is I'm not going to get any better. It's just I don't want to get any worse.
Right. Yeah.
So, and there's not too much you can do for neuropathy. It's really taking vitamins and trying to be strong and exercise. But when your body's in so much pain,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
That's
it's
easier
tough.
said than done. Yeah. Yeah. So do you have anything planned for the 3-year anniversary? A little tribute, or I know
Well, yeah,
I want to get into now to the Fallen Stars because that's a really really cool initiative that I've followed since the outset. You got the logo on your shirt there. Talk
I
to us
do.
about, and it's at www.fallenstars.org. I'll have the links up on the show. Tell me about that, and obviously where it came from and what you're doing with it.
Well, it was really an idea between myself and a good friend of mine from New York, from Long Island, Mariette's, who's been a great friend to me for over 35 years. And she really sort of instrumental in helping me put Fallen Stars together. And it was a tribute and an honor to my son and Mark. You know, the ranch is for Mark Pavlich, and Fallen Stars is for my son Brock and for Mark. And it's really trying to help youth in Hong Kong here, because the suicide of young men in Hong Kong is very high. Uh, High school, university, I think it's like 17-18%. It's very high. And there's a lot of pressure on kids in Hong Kong academically.
Yeah.
It's all about academics. So as I said, I wanted to honor my son. I didn't want him to be forgotten. And he was studying mental health and recovery at the university in Nova Scotia. So he had finished his first 2 years, and when he came back in the summer, that's when he was murdered.
Was it
in Ben-
Acadia? Was he at Acadia or St. FX?
Um, uh, no, it's I'm sorry, it's
Dalhousie, St. Mary's,
no, it's I forget the name of the town. I'm sorry, John.
Wolfville?
I'll probably remember it while I'm
Yeah,
telling
no
you.
worries. Yeah, yeah. No, I'm out here, right?
It's a name. It's a name you've heard of in Halifax.
Yeah.
Uh,
So Dalhousie or St. Mary's, probably.
or not in Halifax, excuse me, in Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
It's probably the second biggest city in Nova Scotia. I just can't remember it right now.
Cape Breton,
But
Sydney. Yeah. Cool.
no. Um. Anyways, that's when I started writing, really,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where, when I started writing the book, I didn't know I was going to write a book. I was more keeping a journal, writing my thoughts down, and it was therapeutic for me to write. I'm not really a writer. I mean,
Well,
what
you're
I
pretty
do.
good at it. You're pretty gripping, in my opinion. So I think it's going to be a hit. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, thank you. And so I really get very in deeply of my son's court case and what had happened, and with Mark, my relationship with Mark. It's really about both Brock and Mark. Because when my son was murdered, I was thrust into this cell of trauma, like a prisoner, and I had to try and find my way out of there. And that's what I learned about myself, is how do I overcome that? I mean, everybody has to overcome a lot of things and challenges in their own life, be that health wise or be it through other traumatic incidents. And to be able to keep moving forward and not get stuck in that past is really the key. You're not gonna forget about it, and because that's the way that you learn. But I do equate it to climbing a mountain. Is that if you're in the middle of that mountain and you can't find a path up anymore, then you have to find a different route. You can't just keep trying to go the same way, because it's not working. So maybe there's a different path. So it's up to you to be able to find that path and what works for you, because it's something that works. Everybody's different. I know nature is a big healer, and I believe in that. I do believe in therapy also for people that are going through different incidents. It's one thing to talk to your friends. It's another thing to talk to a professional. And yeah, I think you learn a lot about yourself. And the key was really in the book is really just trying to help somebody, is letting them know that what I went through, and that it can happen to anybody. And how do you get out of that deep hole that you're put into? Yeah. And it's a big climb. It's like climbing Everest. It's not easy. You just keep trying to do it every day. And that's what I try to do. I try and think of good things about my son and Mark before I go to bed and when I get up in the morning. Yeah. That's how I start my day. And I believe in what I believe in. And that faith sort of is what I rely on. It's questionable at times with what I've been through.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know one thing is that if you're the captain of the team, that you care about people, and that's why they make you captain.
Yeah.
Is you're going to help your teammates no matter what. You're not always the best player. You're just the one that they can count on when things get tough. So I hope that's what people think about me, is that, that they want to have me on their side when things get tough, because I'm going to be there, and I'm not afraid of the consequences to myself.
Well, very, very well said, my friend. No, that sums it up. And I look up to you. I looked up to you when I was a kid, because you're a big, mean hockey player. I look up to you now as a man and a father, because I can get strength if I'm having a tough time, based on seeing how you're selfless, and you're caring so much about other people and helping people, by being transparent about your struggles. And it's fantastic. I can't wait till this show airs, and the comments that'll come in. I think you're inspiring. The book, when let's talk about the book. When's that going to come out? Do you have any
Well, the easy part with the book was writing it.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, now
I gotta say that, I say that it's easy, but I had to relive everything because that's the way that I write.
yeah,
When I write or I tell a story, I mean, I have to know that story or I just don't tell about it. I mean, I got hundreds of stories.
right.
Playing hockey, and especially when you travel around with 20 guys, you're going to have a lot of stories, but I want them to be accurate. So if I don't remember them, I move on to the next one. And so I had to go through all those events once again with my son's murder and with Mark's suicide months later after that. Now, when my son was murdered, before that, I was the one who was communicating with Mark. After my son was murdered, it was Mark who was communicating with me. So we helped each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it's all about.
Well said. And again, continue to inspire. Let me know when the book comes out, and we'll promote it. And I certainly want a copy as soon as they come. And thanks, Barry. I appreciate it. I know it's early in the morning over there, and I appreciate your time. We're going to edit these clips together and put it out on Sunday night. But thanks again, and all the best, my friend. And if you ever need anything, reach out, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
John, thank you. If there's one thing that I could mention that we had talked about earlier, and I had thought about it because I talked to this player, and he played in the NHL. He played for Hamilton when they beat us in the Memorial Cup, and that's Rick Sealing.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Yeah.
And Rick, of course, went on to play in the NHL, had a great career. And I speak to him often. He's involved in youth hockey.
Great.
And, so I just give a shout out to him and all my best to him. And all the best to all the former players that I played against, teammates and not teammates. It's a brotherhood, always will be. And we look after each other. So, yeah, it's been my pleasure to talk with you today.
Thanks again, Barry. And we'll certainly talk again soon. And all the best with the book and the ranch and the Fallen Stars.
Yeah. Thank you, John.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's see here.